The crowd was stacked at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base history like a blade through silk. Colonel Marks Hayes stood in the command bunker, his weathered hands gripping a lukewarm cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The transmission was garbled, fragmented, but 3 words came through crystal clear: Ghost Rider down. The Afghan mountains loomed like sleeping giants against the star-drunk sky. Somewhere out there, in the jagged wilderness that had claimed so many before, an A-10 Thunderbolt II had vanished into the darkness. The pilot's last known position was Grid Square 42 Sierra, a hell stretch of terrain where the Taliban moved like shadows and coalition forces rarely ventured after sunset. "We've lost all contact with Captain Reina Finks Castellanos," reported Lieutenant Davies, his voice tight with barely concealed worry. The young officer's fingers danced across his console, searching for any trace of the missing aircraft. Her last transmission was at 3:12, reporting she was engaging multiple targets in support of Team Viper. She clenched. Phoenix. Of course it would be her. The one who had earned her call sign not for rising from ashes, but for her uncanny ability to bring dead aircraft back to life when everyone else had written them off. She was the pilot other pilots whispered about in the ready room, the one who had landed a shot-up Warthog on a highway in Iraq with no hydraulics and half a wing missing. The conditions, Hayworth asked, though he already knew the answer would be grim. "You're rating rapidly, sir. Visibility near zero, winds gusting to 40 knots. Storm front moving in from the northwest." Davies paused, then added quietly, "Search and rescue's grounded until dawn." Well, stared at the tactical display, watching the red X that marked Finka's last known position. Around the base, maintenance crews worked through the night, their floodlights casting eerie shadows across the flight line. The remaining A-10s sat like sleeping predators, their shark-mouthed nose arc grinning in the artificial light. There was something else in the air that night, something that made the hair on the back of Hayworth's neck stand up. Call it intuition, call it experience, but in his 26 years of military service, he had learned to trust his gut, and his gut was telling him that Finks wasn't done fighting. Mountains held their secrets close, but Marks Hayworth knew one thing for certain: underestimating Captain Reina Castellanos had been the last mistake many people ever made. Hours earlier, the briefing room at Fockestrel had buzzed with the usual pre-mint tension. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red circles indicating known enemy positions and blue squares marking friendly forces. The air conditioning wheezed against the oppressive Afghan heat, fighting a losing battle against the assembled bodies of pilots, ground crews, and intelligence officer. Reina Castellanos sat near the back, her flight suit already darting with sweat despite the early hour. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet everything to protect. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held the thousand-yard stare that came from too many missions over hostile territory. "Up, people," Colonel Hayworth announced, his voice cutting through the chatter like a drill sergeant's whistle. "We've got reports of a Taliban convoy moving through the Korangal Valley. Intelligence suggests they're carrying weapons and personnel to reinforce positions near combat outpost Restrepo." It fell silent. Everyone knew Restrepo. The remote outpost had been under siege for months, its defenders clinging to their rocky perch like modern-day Spartans at Thermopylae. Resupply missions were a nightmare, and close air support was often the only thing standing between the soldiers there and being overrun. "Phoenix, you're taking the lead, bird," Hayworth continued, his eyes finding Castellanos in the crowd. "Skull and Voodoo will provide cover while you work the primary target area." Jake Skull Morrison, cocky 26-year-old from Nexus, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Roger that, sir, but maybe we should let one of the experienced pilots handle the primary. Phoenix here might be getting a little long in the tooth for the tough jobs." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. Morrison was known for his mouth as much as his flying ability, but this time he had crossed a line. The silence that followed was deafening. Castellanos didn't flinch. She had heard it all before: whispers about the old lady pilot, questions about whether she still had the edge, doubts about her reflexes. What they didn't know was that every slight, every dismissive comment only added fuel to the fire that burned inside her. "Appreciate your concern, Skull," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough ice to freeze hell over. "But I think I can manage to point my aircraft in the right direction and pull the trigger." With intervened before the exchange could escalate further. "Phoenix has more combat hours than the rest of you combined. She'll take point, and that's final." The briefing continued, covering weather patterns, fuel loads, and emergency procedures. Castellanos studied the mission parameters with the intensity of a surgeon reviewing an operation. The Korangal Valley was a maze of ridgelines and hidden caves, a place where aircraft went to die and pilots went to prove themselves. Our doors groaned open like the mouth of some mechanical beast, revealing the pre-dawn darks beyond. 3 A-10 Thunderbolt IIs sat in formation on the tarmac, their distinct twin engines and straight wings giving them the appearance of armored angels. In the pale light of the maintenance floods, their GAU-8 Avenger cannons jutted from their noses like the tusks of prehistoric elephant. His aircraft, tail number 780691, bore the scars of numerous combat missions. Patches of frail aluminum dotted her fuselage where shrapnel had been repaired, and her engine showed the telltale signs of hard use. But to Castellanos, she was the most beautiful machine in the world. Sergeant Maria Santos, Finka's dedicated crew chief, stood beside the aircraft with her usual pre-flight checklist. At 24, Santos had already earned a reputation as one of the best maintainers in the quadrant. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she checked control surfaces, inspected ordnance, and verified system readiness. "Ready to hunt, ma'am," Santos reported, her voice filled with quiet pride. "I loaded her up with a full complement of 30 rounds, plus 4 Mavericks and 2 LAU-131 rocket pods. If it moves, and it shouldn't, you'll have the firepower to stop it." Castellanos nodded, running her own hands along the aircraft's skin. This pre-flight ritual was more than just procedure. It was communion between pilot and machine, a moment of understanding that transcended mere mechanical function. Every rivet, every panel, every system had to be perfect. In combat, there were no second chances for oversight. "It's looking ugly out there," Santos added, glancing toward the mountains where storm clouds were beginning to gather. "Visibility is going to be marginal at best." "Warthog was built for ugly weather," Phoenix replied, beginning her external inspection. "Besides, the bad guys don't get to pick perfect conditions either." She worked her way around the aircraft, checking everything from tire pressure to ordnance arming switches. Castellanos felt the familiar pre-mint calm settling over her. This was her element, her natural habitat. On the ground, she might be subject to the politics and prejudices of military life, but in the air, strapped into the cockpit of an A-10, she was exactly where she belonged. The horizon was beginning to show the first faint trace of dawn when she finally climbed the ladder into her cockpit. The familiar smell of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and worn leather greeted her like an old friend. Her hands moved automatically through the start checklist, each switch and control as familiar as her own heartbeat. Strider Flight, this is Tower, the radio crowd. You are cleared for departure. Whether update shows conditions deteriorating rapidly in your target area, be advised extraction assets are limited. Skeeter microphone. Tower, Ghost Rider 1, copy all, we'll make it quick and clean. As her engine spooled up and the Warthog began to taxi toward the runway, you couldn't shake the feeling that this mission would be anything but quick and clean. The A-10s lifted off into a sky that seemed to mirror the uncertainty of their mission. Dawn painted the Afghan landscape in shades of amber and rust, but storm clouds were massing on the horizon like an invading army. Phoenix led the formation in a loose finger grip, with Skull off her right wing and Captain Lisa, Voodoo Chen bringing up the left side. Strider Flight, this is Overlord. The AWACS controller's voice filled their headset. Be advised, we're showing multiple contacts in your target area. Recommend extreme caution on approach. It's acknowledged the transmission while scanning the terrain below. The Korangal Valley stretched out beneath them like a wound in the earth, its rocky walls scarred by centuries of conflict. Somewhere down there, American soldiers were fighting for their lives, and it was her job to even the odds. Strider 2, this is Lead, she transmitted to Skull. I want you to establish a high orbit while Voodoo and I make the initial pass. Keep your eyes open for SAMs or AAA. I'll be Lead, but maybe I should take the first run. Our reflexes might be a little quicker than yours these days. Comment hung in the air like a challenge. Phoenix felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice professional. Native 2, maintain your assigned position and follow my lead. Miles out from the target area, the weather began to deteriorate just as forecast. Clouds rolled in like gray wool, reducing visibility to mere hundreds of yards. Turbulence increased, buffeting the heavily laden aircraft as they pressed deeper into the mountain. Strider Lead, this is Team Viper Actual. A new voice broke through the static. Captain Rodriguez, the ground force commander at Copper Strepo, sounded exhausted but determined. We've got at least 2 technical vehicles and approximately 15 personnel moving through grid square 42 Sierra. They're setting up what looks like mortar positions about 800 meters north of our perimeter. Studied her moving map display, correlating the grid coordinates with the terrain featured below. The target area was a nightmare of interlocking ridgelines and hidden draws, perfect ambush country for insurgents who knew every rock and tree. Viper Ghost Rider Lead copies. We're inbound your location. Can you mark the target area with smoke? Div on the smoke, Ghost Rider. We're taking sniper fire from multiple positions. Any marking would just give away our exact location. Situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without clear target marking and with weather conditions worsening by the minute, the mission was quickly becoming a test of skill, judgment, and raw courage. Phoenix felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with high-stakes combat flying. Strider Flight, be advised we're going in without marks, she transmitted to her wingman. Visual identification only. Watch your altitude and maintain formation spacing. As they approached the target area, the A-10s dropped to just above the ridgeline, their engines echoing off the canyon walls like mechanical thunder. Phoenix's eyes swept the terrain below, searching for any sign of any movement while keeping one eye on her instruments and another on the rapidly closing weather front. Then he saw them. 2 old pickup trucks sat parked in a small clearing, their beds bristling with heavy machine guns and what appeared to be a recoilless rifle. Around the vehicles, insurgents in traditional Afghan dress moved with military precision, setting up firing positions and hauling ammunition from concealed caches. Strider Lead tallied 2 technicals and multiple personnel, Phoenix reported, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Beginning attack run from the south. Gull, maintain overwatch. Voodoo, you're with me on the same pass. Banked the Warthog into a shallow dive, lining up the GAU A-10 with the closest technical. At this altitude in these conditions, the margin for error was razor thin. One wrong move, one moment of inattention, and she could easily fly into the mountainside or stumble into a hidden anti-aircraft position. Sergeants below spotted her aircraft and began scattering like ants from a disturbed nest. Muzzle flashes sparked from their position as they opened fire with small arms, the bullets passing harmlessly below her aircraft. But Phoenix knew that in these mountains, the real threat came from weapons you couldn't see until it was too late. Finger found the trigger as the first technical filled her head-up display. The GAU A-10 roared to life, sending a stream of 30 depleted uranium rounds downrange at 3,900 rounds per minute. The sound was like the world's most violent zipper being opened, and the recoil actually slowed the massive aircraft in flight. First technical simply disintegrated under the withering fire. Metal fragments and burning fuel scattered across the clearing, secondary explosions from stored ammunition added to the destruction. Phoenix pulled up sharply, climbing back above the ridgeline while simultaneously setting up for her next run. At its lead, Voodoo reported from her position high above the bow. You got the first vehicle clean. The second one is trying to displace to the north. Rolled inverted and pulled through in another dying attack, this time targeting the fleeing technical. The insurgents had learned from watching their comrades die and were laying down heavy suppressed fire in her direction. Trace rounds created deadly shows in the morning air, but the A-10's titanium bathtub around her cockpit was designed to withstand exactly this kind of punishment. Second burst from the GAU-8 caught the moving technical just as it tried to round a bend in the trail. The massive rounds punched through the vehicle's thin skin like paper, turning it into scrap metal and flame. The surviving insurgents abandoned their positions and began fleeing toward a series of caves carved into the mountainside. Viper, Ghost Rider Lead, Phoenix transmitted as she climbed back to altitude. Both technicals are destroyed. I count approximately 10 personnel fleeing toward caves at grid 42 Sierra Delta. Standing work, Ghost Rider, Rodriguez replied. That takes the immediate pressure off our position. Those mortars were getting uncomfortably close. Phoenix's sense of satisfaction was short-lived. Her threat warning receiver suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree, indicating that somewhere in the maze of mountain below, an enemy radar was painting her aircraft. The whine of the radar warning receiver sent ice water through Phoenix's veins. In the A-10 community, that sound was known as the Song of Death, the electronic signature of a surface-to-air missile system acquiring a target. After nearly a decade of fighting in Afghanistan, the Taliban had learned to adapt, trading their primitive weapons for sophisticated systems acquired from various sources. Rider Lead, Skull here, Morrison's voice growled through the radio, suddenly stripped of its usual arrogance. I'm showing multiple radar contacts from your 6 o'clock position. Looks like they've got a SAM site tucked into those ridgelines. Immediately began defensive maneuvers, diving toward the deck while dispensing chaff and flares in predetermined patterns. The A-10 was built for speed. Its maximum velocity was barely half that of most modern fighters, but it was built to absorb punishment and keep flying. Right now, she needed every ounce of that legendary durability. Ghost Rider's this lead. We've got active SAM threats in the area. Voodoo, egress to the south and establish holding pattern at Angels 10. Skull, maintain your orbit but be ready to provide cover if I go down. Radar lock broke momentarily as Phoenix used the terrain to mask her signal. flying so low that her landing gear nearly scraped the rocky outcroppings. But she knew the threat was still out there, waiting for her to show herself again. The insurgents had learned patience from years of fighting a marionette power. Rider lead, Team Viper. Rodriguez's voice was tight with concern. We're still taking heavy fire from the cave complex. If you can't neutralize those positions, we're going to be in serious trouble. Found herself caught in the combat dilemma. Complete the mission or preserve the aircraft. The soldiers on the ground needed her support, but flying in with SAM envelope was tantamount to suicide. In the old days, before precision weapons and real-time intelligence, pilots had to make these decisions based purely on instinct and incomplete information. Up just enough to clear the next ridgeline and immediately spotted the source of her problem. Nailed in a narrow depression about 3 kilometers north of the cave complex, sophisticated SA-14 Gremlin missile system sat camouflaged among the rocks. Its operators had chosen their position well. They could engage aircraft attacking the caves while remaining hidden from casual observation. Strider 2, this lead, Phoenix transmitted, her mind already formulating a plan. I need you to make a high-speed pass from east to west across grid 42 Tango. Draw their attention while I set up for a maverick shot from the south. Div lead, Morrison replied immediately. That's suicide. You should egress and let me handle the SAM site. I've got better odds of surviving if something goes wrong. For a moment, Phoenix felt the familiar sting of being second-guessed by a younger, less experienced pilot. But this wasn't about ego or proving points. It was about getting the job done and bringing everyone home alive. I'll follow my instructions or I'll have you grounded for insubordination, she snapped. Make your pass in 30 seconds. Morrison's A-10 screamed across the valley at low, drawing the SAM site's attention. Phoenix approached from the opposite direction. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, selecting an AGM-65 Maverick missile and locking onto the heat signature of the enemy radar system. It leaped from its rail with a whoosh of riot exhaust, shrieking across the valley on a column of fire and smoke. Maverick missile struck the SA-14 site with devastating precision, turning sophisticated electronics and trained operators into a fireball that could be seen for miles. Secondary explosions from stored missiles added punctuation marks to the destruction, sending debris tumbling down the mountainside like a metallic avalanche. And he shot lead, Voodoo reported from her overwatch position. Target is destroyed. I'm showing no more radar contacts in the immediate area. She allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction before focusing on the primary mission. The cave complex still harbored insurgents who were continuing to harass the soldiers at Copper Strepo, and weather conditions were deteriorating by the minute. Storm clouds now covered most of the valley, and visibility was dropping rapidly. Viper Ghost Rider lead. SAM threat is neutralized. I'm going to work over those cave positions with rockets and can fire. Keep your heads down. Rolled into another attack run, this time targeting the mouth of the large cave, where muzzle flashes indicated concentrated enemy fire. The LAU-131 rock pods under her wings contain 19 2.75-inch Hydra rocks each, designed specifically for this kind of precision work against point targets. Phoenix lined up for her attack. Her aircraft suddenly shuddered as if struck by a giant fist. Warning light began flashing across her instrument panel, and she could hear the distinct whine of hydraulic fluid streaming past her canopy. Ground fire from the caves had found its mark, punching holes through her aircraft's armored skin. Rider lead, your stream fluid, Morin reported, his voice suddenly professional and concerned. Looks like they got your hydraulics. Fought to keep the damaged aircraft under control as she completed her attack run. Despite the battle damage, her rocks found their mark, sealing several cave entrances with precisely placed explosions. The surviving insurgents would be trapped underground for hours, if not permanently. Problems were just beginning. The A-10's hydraulic system controlled everything from flight controls to landing gear, and she could already feel the aircraft becoming sluggish and unresponsive. To make matters worse, the storm front was now directly overhead, bringing with it near-zero visibility and turbulence that threatened to tear her wounded aircraft apart. Rider flight, this is lead, she transmitted, trying to keep her voice calm despite the circumstances. I've taken battle damage and I'm declaring an emergency. RDB immediately. Do not attempt to provide assistance. Negative lead, both Morrison and Chen replied simultaneously. We're staying with you. Phoenix fought to maintain control of her crippled aircraft. You couldn't help but feel a growing respect for her wingmen. Despite their earlier conflicts and professional jealousy, when push came to shove, they were willing to risk their own lives to help a fellow pilot in trouble. The question now was whether any of them would make it home alive. Back to Fobcastro became a nightmare of mechanical failure and deteriorating weather. Phoenix's A-10 hemorrhaged hydraulic fluid like a wounded animal bleeding out, leaving a visible trail in the turbulent air behind her. Her flight controls required increasingly heroic efforts to maintain basic aircraft attitude, and several critical systems had failed completely. Rider lead, Kestrel Tower, the radio crackled through heavy static. We caught your emergency. Emergency crews are standing by. Be advised weather conditions at field are now below minimums for normal operations. She checked her instruments and felt her heart sink. Fuel was becoming critical. Her hydraulic pressure was nearly zero, and the backup manual reverse system was fighting her every input. Landing a healthy A-10 in these conditions would be challenging enough, attempting it in a battle-damaged aircraft bordered on impossible. This is Skull, Morrison's voice cut through her concentration. I can see the base through a break in the clouds at your 2 o'clock. You're going to have to thread the needle between those thunderheads. Her rain-streaked canopy, Phoenix could barely make out the runway lights of Fobcastro flickering like distant stars through the storm. The approach would require her to fly a precision instrument approach in an aircraft with failing system, in weather conditions that would challenge even an experienced airline pilot. Began her descent, fighting continuous turbulence that tried to flip her aircraft inverted. The stick felt like it was moving through molasses, requiring both hands and all her strength to make even minor corrections. Warning lights painted her cockpit in shades of red and amber, each one representing another system pushed beyond its design limits. Tower, Ghost Rider lead is 3 miles out, requesting straight approach to runway 09. Aircraft is severely damaged and may not be able to execute a go-around. Ghost Rider lead, you're cleared for emergency approach. Fire and rescue vehicles are in position. Phoenix lined up for final approach. Her aircraft suddenly lurched to the left as the remaining hydraulic system finally gave up completely. She was now flying entirely on manual reversion, muscle power against aerodynamic forces that wanted to tear her aircraft apart. Her arms burned with the effort of maintaining control. You're drifting left of center line, Voodoo reported, flying formation just off her wing. Correct right, correct right. Pulled back on the stick with everything she had, watching the runway approach through a windscreen that was now completely obscured by hydraulic fluid and rainwater. She was flying entirely by feel now, using every bit of skill accumulated over years of combat flying. and landing gear touched down hard, sending shockwaves through the damaged airframe. Phoenix immediately deployed the drag chute and applied maximum braking, feeling the aircraft vibrate as it fought to dissipate the energy of landing. Sparks flew from the right main gear, indicating structural damage that threatened to send her careening off the runway. Somehow, impossibly, the battered Warthog rolled to stop just short of the runway's end. Sea vehicles swarmed Phoenix's aircraft before the engines had even spooled down completely. Firefighters sprayed foam across the hot metal, while medical personnel stood ready with stretchers and trauma kits. Through her canopy, Phoenix could see Colonel Hayworth running toward her aircraft, his usually composed face showing genuine concern. Sergeant Santos was among the first to reach the cockpit, scrambling up the crew ladder with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, are you hurt? Can you move everything?" He conducted a quick self-assessment. Despite the violence of the emergency landing, she appeared to be uninjured except for muzzle strain from fighting the unplugging of controls. "I'm okay, Santos, but I think your bird is going to need some serious surgery." She climbed down from the cockpit. Phoenix could see the extent of the battle damage for the first time. Her aircraft looked like it had been through a blender. Holes punctured the fuselage in dozens of places. Hydraulic fluid covered everything in a slick, rainbow sheen, and the right main landing gear was canted at an angle that suggested structural failure. "Jesus Christ, Phoenix," Morrison said, approaching with his helmet tucked under his arm. His face had gone pale as he examined the damage. "How the hell did you get the thing back on the ground?" She could answer. Colonel Hayworth arrived at the scene. He walked around the aircraft slowly, taking in every detail of the battle damage with the eye of someone who had seen similar scenes too many times before. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there during the morning briefing. "Castellanos, I need a full debrief in 30 minutes. But first, I want you to know that what you accomplished today was nothing short of miraculous." He felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The mission was complete, her aircraft had survived, and most importantly, the soldiers at Copper Street were safe for another day. But she also knew that there was just one mission among many, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities to prove herself all over again. The medical team conducted their mandatory post-flight examination. Phoenix watched her ground crew begin the complex process of assessing whether her aircraft could be repaired or would have to be written off as a combat loss. Santos moved around the damaged Warthog like a surgeon examining a patient, her experienced eyes cataloging every bullet hole and structural crack. "Fly again, ma'am," Santos finally announced. "It'll take some work, but this old bird is too tough to kill." He smiled for the first time since takeoff. In the A-10 community, there was no higher compliment than being told your aircraft was too tough to kill. It was a reflection not just on the machine, but on the pilot who had brought it home against impossible odds. As she walked toward the debriefing room, Phoenix couldn't shake the feeling that her real test was still to come. The briefing room felt different now than it had during the morning briefing. The same maps covered the walls, the same tactical displays showed unit positions and threat assessment, but the atmosphere had shifted in ways that were difficult to quantify. Phoenix sat across from Colonel Hayworth, her flight suit still damp with perspiration and hydraulic fluid, while Morrison and Chen flanked her on either side. "Let's start from the beginning," Hayworth said, his fingers steepled as he leaned back in his chair. "Walk me through everything from initial contact with Team Viper to your emergency landing." Launched into a detailed account of the mission, covering everything from target identification to battle damage assessment. She spoke with the clinical precision of a professional pilot, but Hayworth could hear the underlying emotions in her voice, the satisfaction of missed success, the frustration of equipment failure, and the quiet pride of bringing her crew home alive. "Sam's site was well-positioned and professionally operated," she concluded. "Intelligence should be made aware that the Taliban has access to more sophisticated systems than we initially believed." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. During the debriefing, it had become clear that his earlier comments about Finka's age and experience had been not just unprofessional, but potentially dangerous. His suggestion that he should take the primary act role could have resulted in a less experienced pilot facing the SAM threat without proper tactical preparation. "Morrison," Hayworth said, turning his attention to the younger pilot, "do you have anything to add to Captain Castellanos' assessment?" Morrison looked directly at Phoenix for the first time since they had landed. "Sir, I owe Captain Castellanos an apology. Her tactical decisions during the engagement were textbook perfect. If I had been in the lead aircraft, I probably wouldn't have survived the SAM engagement." Mission hung in the air like a challenge accepted and answered. Phoenix nodded acknowledgement but didn't gloat over the younger pilot's change in attitude. She had been where Morrison was now, young, confident, and convinced that experience was no substitute for raw talent. Combat had a way of teaching humility to those who survived long enough to learn. "Real question," Hayworth continued, "is how we prevent the kind of tactical surprise in the future. If the insurgents have access to modern SAM systems, our entire operational approach may need to be reconsidered." Who had remained quiet throughout most of the debriefing, finally spoke up. "Sir, I think we also need to discuss Finka's aircraft handling during the emergency. What she accomplished today was beyond the scope of normal training parameters." Pulled up Finka's personnel file on his tablet, scrolling through pages of commendations, training records, and performance evaluation. Captain Rain Castellanos had been flying the A-10 for 8 years, with over 1,200 combat hours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her record was spotless, but he was beginning to realize that her true value to the squadron went far beyond what could be quantified in official data. "Castellanos, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions today. But more importantly, I'm also recommending you for promotion to Major and assignment as our new Weapons and Tactics Officer." He felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal advancement. The Weapons and Tactics position was a recognition of expertise, acknowledgement that her experience and judgment were valued by her superiors and peers alike. As later, Phoenix stood beside her repaired aircraft as Staff Sergeant Santos conducted the final post-maintenance inspection. True to her word, the dedicated crew chief had worked around the clock to bring the battle-damaged Warthog back to full operational status. New hydraulic lines snaked through the aircraft's interior, fresh aluminum hatches covered the bullet holes, and every system had been tested and retested to ensure reliability. "Actually in better shape now than before the mission," Santos reported with justifiable pride. "We upgraded several components while we had her opened up, and I personally test flew every system multiple times." Ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the slight texture difference where patches had been applied. Each repair told a story of skill under fire, of machines pushed beyond their limits, and of the dedication of the people who kept them flying. In the A-10 community, battle damage was shameful. It was a badge of honor that proved both pilot and aircraft had been tested in combat and emerged victorious. But Finka's emergency landing had spread throughout the base with the speed that military news always traveled. Ground troops who had never spoken to her before nodded respectfully as she passed. Maintenance personnel took extra care with her pre-flight preparation. In the basic manner, a full colonel who rarely spoke to individual pilots had made a point of congratulating her personally. Perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Captain Morrison approached her as she completed her walk-around inspection, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. "Phoenix, I wanted to talk to you before your next mission," he said, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance. "I've been thinking about what happened up there, and I realized something important." Paused in her inspection, giving Morrison her full attention. The transformation in the younger pilot's attitude had been dramatic, but she wanted to hear his thoughts expressed in his own words. "So much time worrying about whether you still had the reflexes for combat flying that I never bothered to consider whether I had the experience for it," Morrison continued. "When that SAM site lit up, my first instinct was to run. Your first instinct was to figure out how to complete the mission and protect the guys on the ground." Perhaps the most mature statement Finks had ever heard from Morrison, and it represented a level of self-awareness that many pilots never achieved regardless of their age or experience level. Combat had a way of stripping away pretense and revealing what people were really made of underneath. Finks said, using his given name for the first time, "Experience isn't about being old. It's about learning from every mission, every mistake, and every close call. You've got good instincts and excellent flying skills. Now you just need to develop the judgment that comes with time and practice." Morrison walked away. Finks reflected on the strained nature of military culture. Respect had to be earned through demonstrated competence under pressure, but once earned, it could transform relationships and entire unit dynamics almost overnight. Months later, Major Ray and Phoenix Castellano stood before a classroom filled with young pilots attending the Weapons and Tactics course. The students represented the next generation of Warthog drivers, eager faces filled with the confidence that comes from surviving flight training and earning their wings. They had come to learn the advanced techniques that would keep them alive in combat, and Phoenix was there to teach them. "A-10 isn't the fast aircraft in the Air Force inventory," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned her credentials in combat rather than a classroom. "It's not the most sophisticated, and it's certainly not the prettiest, but what it lacks in speed and technology, it makes up for in survivability and effectiveness." The wall behind her, a large photograph showed her battle-damaged aircraft from that night in Afghanistan. Bullet holes, hydraulic stains, and structural damage were clearly visible, but the Warthog sat proudly on the ramp, intact and ready to flee again. Aircraft took multiple hits from small arms fire and a surface.